Hi everybody. All right, so this is going to be a lesson on the Cold War coming home. So kind of how those political ideas that are going to be put together by Truman and Eisenhower and Kennedy are going to affect people's daily lives here at home. We're mainly going to be focusing on the 1950s. And we'll see a little bit more of the impact on the 1960s, but many of these issues and traditions are going to last beyond into the 1960s. So let's go ahead and get started. So first topic that we're going to be looking at is what is life like under the threat of the atomic bomb? We looked in our previous classes about what would it look like if one of those atomic bombs actually was detonated on today's society and kind of the death count. So we saw how serious those could be. So we're going to see what that threat looked like to the American people. So first off, like I said, we do feel like we are under constant threat of nuclear attack because of this arms race. When we build a bigger bomb, they build a bigger bomb, and that is going to lead for just this constant threat that this is not just a question of if there's going to be a nuclear attack, but rather when. They believed that this was eventual, and people didn't really have faith in the Soviet Union that there would be any kind of warning, that they believed that it was truly going to be a surprise attack, that it would come at any time just because the Soviets felt like it, not because of any ramping up in any particular situation. Now, the government is going to try and calm people's fears. Obviously, they're going to try and help people, maintain a sense of normalcy and don't worry, things are not as bad as you think. But at the same time, they also use the atomic threat as a way to gain support for the government and for the things that they are trying to accomplish. Obviously, if you want to convince Americans to support this arms race that is spending billions and billions and billions of dollars of their tax money rather than that money going to things like education or infrastructure or something like that, you have to give them a reason why they should support that. And so this is going to be one of the ways they do this. And finally, you're going to have not just private, but also public fallout shelters and air raid drills. So this means that the public as a whole is preparing for this attack by having places for people to go in the case of an emergency, as well as doing drills, kind of like we do for fire drills and earthquake drills, to make sure everybody knows and is prepared as to what to do if there is one of these atomic bomb attacks. So this is one of those personal bomb shelters that you could build, and you could literally order the parts for these and the plans for these out of the Sears catalog or out of the Montgomery Ward catalog because they were, seen as kind of an essential. Now they would be on the interior, as you can kind of see here. You can see that this is made out of metal, so that's supposed to help ensure that the radiation doesn't get in, as well as you would have a layer of either brick or earth that is going to then kind of help shield against the blast. So these are not only built into the ground, but there's also extra layers of precaution to ensure that that you were protected from these eventual. These are some pictures that were in magazines at the time that were showing what it was like inside these. You can see kind of on the bottom right hand side kind of what I was talking about that metal interior. You had the fold out beds, you had a lot of the canned foods, canned water. The idea is that you would be able to live within these shelters for up to 6 weeks at kind of like the ideal amount of time that was necessary, that you would be able to stay out of the nuclear fallout that was potentially outside. You would need things like things for sanitation and cleaning. You would need things for like a radio so you could hear any potential news broadcast that might be able to come through. Things to also keep your family entertained. And to prepare families as well as people of the public, there were these air raid drills. I can tell you that both of my parents growing up here in Southern California both did these air raid drills where they were told that they needed to duck and cover underneath their desks, the same way that you guys do for an earthquake drill. And the way that they were taught this was through a cartoon called Bert the Turtle. And this video is going to be linked on our class website, and I highly recommend that you guys watch it. One, because it actually has been utilized on the AP exam before. Obviously, they can't put a movie on the exam, but they have put up like little clips, like stills from this on there before, so that's just something you might want to look at. But the other thing is that it's just kind of funny to watch how they were trying to ensure that children felt safe. And the things that they're, telling people to do, like ducking under a desk or even putting newspaper over your head if there's an atomic bomb blast, can help protect you from the, from the flames and from the bomb blast itself. Now, obviously, if you're right smack dab in the middle of it, I'm sorry, dude, but you're toast. But if you were a little bit further away, the idea is to keep people calm and to give them a sense that there was something they could do to protect themselves. So the next thing we're going to move on to is the Red Scare. Now, we've already talked about one Red Scare before, and that was following World War I. Well, guess what? We have a second Red Scare following World War II. So that makes life super easy. And the first Red Scare and the second Red Scare are very similar to each other, but with a couple of distinct differences. So a couple of quick review. One, with the first Red Scare, we were talking about the fear of socialists and anarchists that were coming to America, generally from South and Eastern Europe, following World War I. We were afraid that these people, through their connection with labor unions, were going to destroy the American way of life. And that is why we implemented things like the immigration laws to prevent them from coming in. With the second Red Scare, there is going to be different ways that we are going to combat the problem that is going to, that is going to have an overall very important impact on not only American culture, but also a lot of American politics that we'll see throughout the 1950s and 60s. So let's begin. So the second Red Scare. The thing that makes this one different is that now we're fearful of communist infiltration and subversion. Now, if you do not know what these terms mean, you need to be familiar with them. So infiltration means that they are sneaking in undetected. All right, so they are able to disguise themselves. They are able to kind of blend into the society. And then subversion is a term you need to know. That means that you're trying to secretly weaken a society and overthrow its government by doing it from within. Trying to do things to just make it unsuccessful. Okay, so we were essentially afraid that these communists were able to sneak their way into the country and they were going to destroy our way of life. So why did we have these fears? Why did this suddenly arise? Well, one of this has to do with just the general distrust between the United States and the Soviet Union during World War II. They got into, the war against Japan basically at the last minute after they had promised to get in much earlier. We just generally didn't trust Joseph Stalin. We knew that, his country was undemocratic, and so we had issues there. But then, after we spent over a decade developing the atomic bomb, taking us all that time and all that money, and just 5 years later, the Soviet Union, they test their first atomic bomb, nicknamed Joe 1, that looks exactly like Fat Man, lets us know for sure that there are Soviet spies active in the United States that we need to be very careful of. So how are we going to deal with this? How are we going to thwart the threat? Well, the first thing that Truman does is he passes the National Security Act, and there are two things that go along with this. The first of these is the creation of the National Security Council. This group is still in operation today. So the National Security Council is made up of people who advise the president on national security issues. So this will include the vice president, the secretary of state, the secretary of defense, the joint chiefs of staff, the CIA director, the NSA director, the attorney general, people whose job it is to know what are the threats against America at any time. And it's also to help organize the cooperation amongst those various agencies to make sure America is protected. Now, going along with that, one of the groups I just mentioned is the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. Their job is to be spies for America to keep us safe. They carried out covert operations. For those of you guys who don't understand the word covert, it means secretive. And so these CIA agents were highly active during the period of the Cold War, throughout the Cold War, not just the 1950s. We're talking all the way up through the end of the Cold War. And in the 1950s and 60s, we become kind of obsessed with anything and everything espionage related. Please remember the word espionage means the same as spying. So what am I talking about? Well, just, the slides before when I was, when it was talking about the Red Scare, you saw that image. That's the famous image of James Bond, which lo and behold comes out at this period of time, because people are obsessed with espionage. Granted, he's British, so it's not totally 100% accurate to what we're talking about for APUSH, but still there's an obsession and an interest in espionage. Second thing, we see a lot of these items here that are from the U.S. Spy Museum. Yes, that is a real thing, located in Washington, D.C. And these were things that were actually utilized. So, for example, what we see right here, this is actually a camera. Now, you see in his hand is the holder, the actual way to capture the image. But what's really cool is that this right here, the button, that is the actual camera. Now, today we're not as impressed because we all have a camera in our pocket at all times. It's called a cell phone. But back in the 1950s, this was like super high tech. We also have a lipstick gun here. We have in that necktie, it actually was a recording device. And then this one at the bottom, I think, is really the most interesting. This is actually an umbrella gun that shot actual bullets, which I just find fascinating. And this all seems like something that you would see in like a spy movie, right? It's something that you would see in James Bond movie, or you would see in the Kingsman movie or something like that. And we actually had tons of movies and television that actually utilized these tropes for their shows. For example, what we see here with the show Get Smart, which was super popular during this period of time. You also had the show The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and all kinds of movies that were about espionage, very popular at this time. Speaking of espionage, probably our greatest achievement and then also greatest failure in espionage was the U-2 incident. So we had developed this high-tech plane. It was able to fly very high. It was a lot quieter than what we had had before. And so this plane was going to allow us to spy over the Soviet Union. Unfortunately, though, it got shot down over the Soviet Union in 1960. We get a call from the Soviet Union and they're like, hey, we have your spy plane. And we were like, spy plane? What spy plane? We don't have a spy plane. And they're like, yeah, it's a spy plane. And we're like, oh, no, not a spy plane. We're doing weather experiments out there. That must be what you're thinking about. It's not a spy plane. And they're like, yeah, no, we know it's a spy plane. We have the pilot. And that's the point where America's like, oh, crap. Now we've definitely been caught. We can't deny that we were spying. We're forced to admit the plane's purpose. Any relationship that we have with the Soviet Union is now toast. But what makes it worse is that the guy that was the pilot, Colonel Francis Gary Powers, he has now been convicted and sentenced to 10 years hard labor in a Russian gulag. That is not a good thing. We cannot allow for that to happen because what do you think is going to happen to an American military spy in a Russian gulag for 10 years? Yes, it's physically punishing, but he's going to be tortured in order to get information. We've got to get this guy out. And so this is going to start a whole new thing in the government where they're going to be trying to figure out how can we get this guy back. And if any of you guys have seen the movie Bridge of Spies, this is where that movie takes on. I'm not going to tell you the end of the story, so that if those of you guys who want to watch the movie can watch it, highly recommend it. It's awesome. It's got Tom Hanks. You can't go wrong. All right, so how do we ensure that people are loyal here at home? First thing is that Truman is going to institute something called the Loyalty Review Program. Now, he himself wasn't actually super psyched about this idea. He thought that it was maybe a little bit hinky, but it was going to screen all federal employees for loyalty, ensure that they, promised to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. But that just wasn't going to be enough because there are other people that might be disloyal within the country. And that brings us to the McCarran Act. The official name of it was the Subversive Activities Control Act, and it did exactly what you think it does. It required communist organizations to register with the Attorney General. This meant that the Attorney General, who is the top lawyer in the country, the government's lawyer, the person who is supposed to enforce the laws of the country, is able to keep track of these people that are in these quote-unquote subversive groups, these groups that could be considered to be dangerous. We also are going to have, and we're going to go back in time a little bit, the creation of the House Un-American Activities Committee. So there are a million committees in both houses of Congress. You've got everything from an oversight committee to, Veterans Affairs Committee to the Intelligence Committee. They've got all kinds of committees. This one in the House of Representatives was on un-American activities. Now, in 1938, they were really concerned about people who were supporting Adolf Hitler and fascism, people who were, who were members of organized crime, that kind of thing. However, as we get into the 1950s, post-World War II, this group is going to be investigating alleged disloyalty and subversive activities in the United States. And they were extremely aggressive. And they would haul people into these hearings, and they would ask everybody the exact same question. Are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party of the United States? And the problem is that you were kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Didn't really matter what you said, because as long as somebody assumed that you had some connection to the Communist Party, you were pretty much already, deemed disloyal. And so even if you hadn't done anything wrong, it still is going to tarnish your reputation. And this is going to go to all levels of government. And the guy that is going to be the very top person to be accused here is going to be a guy by the name of Alger Hiss. He had been one of the top aides in FDR's administration. He had attended and helped plan the Yalta Conference. He helped plan and organize the United Nations. This guy is top levels. Now, 1948, a guy by the name of Whittaker Chambers, who's a former Communist Party member, testified under subpoena before HUAC that Alger Hiss had secretly been a communist while working for the federal government. Hiss gets dragged in front of HUAC. They ask him, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party of the United States? And he's like, absolutely not, categorically denies it. And then Whittaker Chambers is going to repeat this on the radio, and he says, look, this guy is a communist. A grand jury comes together and indicts Hiss on 2 counts of perjury, basically lying to Congress and lying under oath, because essentially there's evidence that shows that Alger Hiss had gone to Communist Party meetings, and, you can't lie to Congress. You can't lie under oath. And so he was found guilty of perjury, and he was sentenced to jail. Now, Alger Hiss maintained his innocence for the rest of his life until his death. He was like, I didn't do this. I'm not a communist. He would repeat that till the day he died. Which brings me to this guy. You might remember him from previous classes. This is our dear friend, but much, much older than the last time we saw him. This is going to be J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI. Now, the FBI is going to be working with HUAC and working with the government to investigate suspected groups that they see as dangerous to American democracy. But there's something you need to understand. J. Edgar Hoover essentially had carte blanche to do whatever he felt was necessary to investigate these quote-unquote subversive groups. And so he is going to tap phone lines, he is going to open people's mail, he's going to have people followed, he is going to plant evidence, things like this, and there's really not much that can be done to say anything otherwise. He has pretty open rules as to what he can do. And he's going to use this to target people that he feels are dangerous to the United States, not necessarily just limited to communists. For example, he's going to use this power to investigate civil rights activists, including Martin Luther King. He's going to use this to investigate women's rights activists in the 1960s and 70s, LGBT activists, and so forth. Because he's been the FBI director from the 1920s all the way up until his death in the 1970s. So this guy's got information and dirt on everyone. And that is going to make him probably one of the most feared people in America. And one of the things that the FBI is going to be looking into is espionage when it comes to our atomic program. After, as I've said before, when the Soviet Union tested Joe 1, we now know somebody's stealing our secrets. And so there was this mass search for who's responsible for this. And there is going to be a couple that are going to be arrested and taken to trial over this very issue. Now, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were a couple from New York who were members of the Communist Party, and they were charged with heading a Soviet spy ring, selling American atomic secrets to the Soviets. And here you have the feared Rosenbergs. Now, you might be looking at them and going, they don't look all that shady. And that's what scared people. They kind of looked like anybody's neighbors. And that terrified folks. If my neighbors could be secretly working for the Soviets, who can I trust? And so this leads to a lot of hysteria in America. Now, they would be convicted of conspiracy to commit espionage during a time of war, and they would be executed by electric chair. However, not only does this increase public fear, as I've already mentioned, but there was severe backlash because there were people who believed that we've done this before and messed up before. If you recall from our previous unit when we were talking about Sacco and Vanzetti in the first Red Scare, they were two Italian anarchists who were accused, convicted, and executed for the robbery and murder of men from the Moral Shoe Company. And it came out afterwards that a lot of this was just hysteria. It was, they were scapegoats for that particular Red Scare that was going on. Well, the Rosenbergs, a lot of people kind of felt the same way. They're like, maybe they weren't actually as bad as we thought. Maybe we just picked on them because they were communists. Now, the information collected by the FBI was not made public for many, many, many years. It wasn't until 1995 when the U.S. government released a series of these documents, codenamed Project Venona, that actually revealed very clearly that Julius Rosenberg had been a courier and had been a recruiter for the Soviets. However, Ethel's involvement was unclear, but still she had been executed. And so a lot of people make a lot of comparisons between the Rosenbergs and Sacco and Vanzetti. This brings us to probably the height of the Red Scare, and that is going to be with McCarthyism. So the guy you see in the picture here, this is Senator Joseph McCarthy. He was a Republican from the state of Wisconsin, and he was in charge of the Senate's version of HUAC, essentially. Their committee that was searching for communists and spies and espionage. And he is going to become famous for a system, a policy that is going to be named after him. It's called McCarthyism, and it really is known as this kind of communist witch hunt that occurred in the 1950s that was based on poor evidence and just fear and hysteria over potential communist infiltration in the United States. Now, he did have his critics. His critics would be people like the cartoonist Herb Bloch, who actually you saw in the previous image there. He went by the pen name Herb Bloch, and you can see here in his political cartoon how people are pushing the Republican Party, shown as the elephant, to basically stand on this policy of McCarthyism, which it doesn't really show to be very stable. And that's because McCarthyism was very much a policy of fear and hysteria. And he's also going to be criticized by the anchorman Edward R. Murrow. Edward R. Murrow would actually go on television and criticize McCarthy's policies and his tactics, and that really drew a lot of negative attention to Murrow. He was targeted by McCarthy, and McCarthy had grown so powerful at this point because Americans overall actually believed that McCarthy was doing the right thing. He was ridding America of these dangerous communists, and he was bringing out the truth. And we couldn't trust people who spoke out against him. And so McCarthy basically was able to silence lots of people. Edward R. Murrow nearly got yanked off the air because of his speaking out against McCarthy. But it all comes crashing down around McCarthy when he decides that he is going to bring this to television to show the American public firsthand how dangerous and how sinister communism had been. He decided that he was going to investigate people from the military. Now, at this point, he had already gone out and told the American public that he had a list of, over 200 people who were in the State Department who had been communists or communist sympathizers. Those are the people that are dealing with American foreign policy. So it kind of, if there were going to be secret spies, that would be the place that you would probably find them. But he is going to bring in military troops and officers and accuse them of subversion. And that is not going to go over well. He's extremely aggressive during these hearings. McCarthy is, just angry and aggressive with his language and the way he delivers his questions. He is using evidence that actually was proven to be falsified, but he just kind of kept at it, and he kept doggedly going after these people. The man you see in the picture here was actually serving as a lawyer for some of these high-ranking military officers. Remember, these are military officers who fought in World War II, fought in Korea, have defended the United States of America militarily. And at one point when McCarthy is just red-faced, angry, spitting, accusing these people of being anti-American and being traitors to the country, their lawyer, he looks him dead in the eye and he says, "Have you no sense of decency, sir?" And the room just goes quiet. And everybody realizes, oh, we went too far. We went too far in accusing the military. And because of this, his popularity, McCarthy's popularity, very quickly declines. He is censured by the Senate, which is the Senate saying, basically, we wash our hands of you. We're not going to be involved with you anymore. They couldn't kick him out because he hadn't done anything technically incorrect or technically illegal, but they kind of washed their hands of him, and he died shortly later. kind of sad, alone, and lonely, which is, kind of the rotten end for McCarthy. However, there was one group that was more feared than just about any, and that is going to be Hollywood. Now, I want you to take a moment and I want you guys to think to yourself, could you honestly, if I asked you right now, could you honestly name your congressional representative or the people that represent you in the United States Senate? I'm going to guess there's a pretty good chance you probably can't name them. And now I'm going to ask you to be honest with yourself. Could you name at least 2 Kardashians? And I'm going to guess you probably can. And what that shows us is the power of Hollywood. We pay more attention to Hollywood. Even though they don't necessarily affect our daily lives, they do affect the way we dress, the things we like, the things we don't like, the places we go, the things that we eat, the way that we dress. So Hollywood does have a huge impact on our culture, and that is what was so feared. And this is going to lead to things like Red Channels, a pamphlet that focused on how dangerous it could be if communists were secretly within Hollywood. What if they are the ones reporting our news? Can we trust the news? Or are they just spreading communist propaganda? There also was a Hollywood blacklist, a list of people in the entertainment industry that were being denied employment because of their political beliefs or their associations, whether they was real or suspected. And these included some of the biggest names at the time. Like the couple that you see in the front here, who are some of the biggest names. This is Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. James Cagney. You have Arthur Miller. You have Charlie Chaplin. Were all being accused of being communists or being communist sympathizers or being anti-American. And these people were unable to get jobs. And probably the most well-known person that you know from this is going to be Lucille Ball. And she was accused of being a communist. She was brought in front of HUAC and she was asked, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? And she said, yes. Lucy was a commie? Now, here's the thing. She explains that she registered as a communist because her grandfather had been a communist, and back in his day it was more acceptable. And he wanted all of his grandchildren and his children to register as communists. And out of love for her grandfather, she registered as a communist. However, she swore that she had never voted communist. She had never attended any of the Communist Party meetings or anything like that. But it did put, a mar on her reputation. And it was something that she kind of would struggle to get through. But thankfully for her, she had her own production company, allowing her show to remain on the air. A lot of people got dropped from their contracts, got dropped from their shows, from their movies, etc., because they had been blacklisted due to these, real or suspected associations with communism. And probably the biggest deal when it comes to all of this is going to be with the Hollywood 10. These were people who had publicly denounced HUAC's tactics, their aggressiveness, and their demands for information. And basically they said, it doesn't matter if I'm a communist or not. I'm an American and I can get to be whatever I want. That's the freedom of speech and freedom of expression that's protected in the First Amendment. But because they refused to speak to Congress, they were then arrested for what we call contempt of Congress. And they were banned from working in the major Hollywood studios. And there was a huge protest that came out for this to free the Hollywood 10. Now, a lot of them, after being freed, continued to work in Hollywood. They just worked secretly, either under pen names or by working uncredited on certain movies and television shows. The last thing that we have is I'm gonna make your language arts teachers happy, and I'm gonna talk about The Crucible. Now, The Crucible is a play that was written by Arthur Miller. He wrote this play about the Salem witch trials, and it talks all about the historical event of the hysteria in Salem surrounding the two the two girls that had gotten, sick and were having all of these visions and convulsions and whatnot that led to the deaths of 21 people. And so this is taught in schools all across America. But the thing is, it's actually not about Salem. It's actually about McCarthyism and the Red Scare. And he was comparing the hysteria of the actual Salem witch hunt to the modern day witch hunt for communists. How everybody's pointing fingers at everybody else and nobody trusts anybody because nobody wants the finger pointed at them. Now, he himself not only was questioned by HUAC, but was convicted of contempt of Congress because he had refused to identify others that had been present at Communist Party meetings that he had attended. Now, don't feel too bad for Arthur Miller, though, because he does end up impressing a young woman who was very popular at the time by the name of Marilyn Monroe, who he would end up marrying. So it's not a bad situation for him. So that's the end of this lesson, and we will then move on to 1950s society and culture.